BusyBox's expert information on developing a property. Should I plan the layout before hiring an architect?
It's a good idea to have some idea of what you're wanting before you use an architect. If you need an architect, some people do, some people don't, and they can come up with new ideas. But if you go to an architect with an absolutely kind of blank mind about it, then I'm not sure it's probably the best use of your money or their time.
Should I employ a project manager?
Project managers are relatively new in terms of a job that exists. It used to always be done by an architect, or it would be your builder. So it's a kind of relatively new role, and it's a bit. They vary very much, project managers, between what they're expecting to do. So the most important thing, if you employ a project manager, is to make sure that your understanding of what they're going to do and their understanding of what they're going to do is the same, because it varies massively from someone who just vaguely gives you a bit of advice here and there to somebody who actually controls the entire site.
Who buys the materials?
Who buys the materials comes down to how your entire contract is set up. It varies from site to site, it varies from job to job. It may be the most important thing is that you're aware before you start the job whose responsibility it is. So I would just make sure that you've written down very clearly what you are expecting that you are supplying, and you make it very clear in writing that you are expecting somebody else to supply the rest of it.
How do I maximise on my return?
Well, the most important thing is to make sure that you know who is likely to want to be the end user of the property, and therefore you can work out what that person is likely to want. It's much easier if you've got some concept as to who is going to live in the property at the end, to be able to kind of engineer the house around that person or family.
How important is the exterior of the property?
Well, exterior is very important and always has been. There's all sorts of terms that people use for it, but ultimately, it matters to people, the outside. So I would spend a bit of extra time making sure that the outside of your property looks as good as the inside. Especially in towns, we often ignore the outside of our houses when we're living in them and don't notice them, but other people do when they come and view a property.
How important is landscaping the garden?
I think garden landscaping is one thing that's really underestimated in terms of its value. You don't have to spend a lot of money, but you do need to put a lot of time in and a lot of thought, or spend a lot of money. It's one of the things that you should try and do really early on, because a bit of sun and a bit of rain buys you money, because you can put a smaller plant in, wait for a year, and it gets bigger, and you'd have had to pay another several £100s for that plant if you had to buy it at the larger stage. Also, plants are much better if you plant them when they're smaller. They actually will grow more than if you try and get a fully mature plant. As an impatient gardener, I know.
What are the biggest mistakes property developers make?
I think the biggest mistakes property developers make is they underestimate how much it's going to cost, they underestimate how long it's going to take, and they underestimate how long it's going to take to buy and sell, as well as the actual building work in the middle. And they're probably too optimistic about how much they're going to sell it for, so their figures are kind of all wrong. That's probably the most important thing.
What are your top tips for developing property?
I suppose the top tips on developing is don't overstretch yourself, and be realistic about your figures, and be realistic about how much time you can put into it, and other than that, I guess the most important thing is probably to actually want to do it, and so be driven by the desire to do it rather than the desire that you might make some money.
www.busybox.com